EIA of CCS. Let's welcome him.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Can you hear me over the back of the hall as well? I also would like to thank ETRI and EPA for inviting me here to this excellent conference. I congratulate you with the CCSA meeting I heard today. Today we're going to talk about the environmental impact assessment of CCS projects and also a bit on environmental impact assessment of CCS plans. So the strategic environmental assessment of CCS. First, a brief explanation of where I work. I work at a company called Ecofis, and colleagues of mine have been working on CCS already since the late 80s. And since then we have been working on developing CCS roadmaps, for instance for the Netherlands where I come from. We have been working on CCS roadmaps and also working on CCS enabling framework, so on what kind of regulatory system being developed and incentivize CCS in the country. We've been working on CCS transport strategies and also CCS options to reduce the CO2 and the power industry sector and reuse CO2 where possible. Recently we also had some studies on the social cost and benefits. So referring to Victor in the morning presentation on what's in it for us. We did a small study for the Netherlands to study how much euros we can earn by developing CCS in the country. Not only looking at cost, but also at revenues. Bio-CCS is a topic for the longer term that's interesting to look at. Going towards negative emissions even. We did a study that estimates this global potential for this combination. But today we're going to focus on one of my particular favorites, and it's the environmental performance of CCS. So the outline of this talk, I'm trying to give you a brief insight on how does the environmental impact assessment, so the regulation, works together with CCS. How does it, how can we develop that, or how does it look like in CCS? We have a brief insight to regulatory aspects of this procedure, to look at the main environmental impacts. So what impacts are important when you look at the whole CCS life cycle, the whole CCS chain. And I want to look at some lessons learned that might be of interest for Taiwan as well to take upon for the next years in developing CCS projects and plans. So the combination of environmental impact assessment, it is a procedure to really take into account effects of a certain project or plan on nature, so on flora and fauna, human beings, but also looking at the soil, water, air, climate, so CO2, the landscape, but also looking at material assets. So are there any material assets that depreciate when developing a project? And this is well funded in EU legislation and also in Dutch legislation, and also Taiwan, of course, has an IEA procedure. Is this better? Can you hear me? No? Let's switch the yellow again. So what is really important to know that your environmental impact procedure, why are you doing such a procedure? Because it takes a long time and money to spend research on getting the full insights of the environmental impact of a certain project. But you want to have that because you have to evaluate the impact. You want to know what kind of impacts are possible when you're doing a CCS project. You have to be sure that you have all the relevant information that you want in a permitting procedure, and you want to have this information ready to get your environmental permits. To, for instance, get your capture plant ready or get your transport and storage site permit. And one really important aspect of the whole environmental impact assessment procedure is to enable public participation in the early phase of the project. Typically, the results of such a whole procedure, you will find that in an environmental impact statement or report. And the most important aspects there, you describe the possible impacts, you compare alternatives, for instance, post-combustion capture versus oxy-fuel capture, or different variants of post-combustion capture. For storage, it can also be comparing different sites, so which site is the most feasible or most benign option from the environmental perspective. And truly important for the public and to all stakeholders in the process is to have a good insight of what we know and also the points we don't know regarding the environmental impacts of CCS. So it truly is the state of knowledge should be reflected in such a procedure. Another variant, or if you look at a more strategic level, you can develop a strategic environmental impact assessment. And those kinds of procedures are done for plants. And this is the EU SEA directive, which also holds for the Netherlands, which says that you have to do a strategic assessment for a project that set the framework for a large-scale project that also requires an environmental impact assessment. So if you, for instance, have a national plan that says that will be the locations where I have CO2 storage, or that will be the location where I have power plants equipped with CCS, then these set the framework for an IEA procedure. And also these plans you have to do a strategic environmental assessment. In the Netherlands, so where I come from, we have split this into an SEA, so Strategic Environmental Assessment for Plants. And these holds mainly for public zoning plans, for instance, large-scale infrastructure planning of pipelines, of electricity structure, power structure. And we also have the project environmental impact assessment, so this will be evaluating impacts on the project level. It's important to have this both know the aspects of the plan, which really is a strategic plan to assess maybe CCS and also its alternatives, and look at, for instance, possible sites where you can store CO2, and to have a look at the project environmental impact assessment, where you really focus on one project and look at the environmental impacts in detail. How does it look like in the Netherlands? Because you don't have to do environmental impact assessment for every project. The IEA obligation, so let's say the threshold where you have to do an environmental impact assessment is about 1.5 megatons of CO2, where you have a pipeline bigger than 0.8 diameter and with a length more than 40 kilometers, and when you store more than 100 kilotons of CO2. So 100 kilotons of CO2 can still be a demonstration project. So any full-scale project should have an environmental impact assessment. So what kind of experience do we have in the Netherlands? Well, already in 2007, stakeholders in the Netherlands thought it would be nice to have already insight into the environmental impacts, so they developed a generic AEA to screen for possible environmental impacts, and they did that only for onshore gas storage in the Netherlands. Then we had the Barendrecht case, which was the plan for an onshore storage project in the Netherlands, which failed due to heavily public opposition against the project. And that project was to have an onshore transport pipeline together with the onshore storage of CO2 in an empty gas reservoir. And for both parts, an environmental assessment were performed. And we have developed the road project, or this is still waiting financial and final investment decision, hopefully by the end of this year, but probably it can also be later. And that will be a project storing CO2 coming from a coal-fired power plant into an offshore storage location. And for the whole chain, an environmental impact procedure has been done. So this road project, it's good to have a bit of insight there. It's a coal-fired power plant here in the Rotterdam area, which captures about 1 megaton of CO2 per year from 1 gigawatt coal-fired power plant using post-combustion capture. Then it's transported by an offshore pipeline, mainly at pressures below 175 bars and below 80 degrees Celsius. And it's storing it into an empty gas reservoir with a capacity of up to 35 megatons. The first reservoir that's going to be filled, if it goes ahead, is an 8 megaton reservoir, which is at 300 kilometers depth. An important thing to note is that the CO2 in the pipeline is being heated during transport, because of when injecting into the empty gas reservoir, there's probably some phase transition due to the lower pressure in the bottom hole of the reservoir and the high pressure in the pipeline. So it can be extensive cooling effects during storage, so that's why the CO2 is being heated in the pipeline. So I already told, for this project, there has been done a project IEA, so there has been an extensive environmental impact assessment for the project. But this project also triggered a strategic environmental assessment. And what it triggered is for capture principle was the location of choice. So in a strategic environmental assessment, they have to provide arguments why they have chosen the Rotterdam area to capture the CO2. For transport, the thing that triggered the strategic environmental assessment was the fact that they crossed the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, that's really important, so they have to provide arguments why this happened and why this is the case, and what the best alternatives are. For storage, it was the location of choice that triggered this assessment. So when you put down a storage location in the Netherlands, in a regional or zoning plan, spatial zoning plan, you will have to do a strategic environmental assessment. And I also highlighted the green part here for the procedures. And that is a new kind of procedure in the Netherlands, that they integrate the whole permitting process for these parts of the CCS chain. So to speed up the project, to speed up the permitting process, they integrated these parts into one-stop permitting shop. That's how they call it in the Netherlands. And to align all the stakeholders from the governmental side, but also from the initiator side, to speed up the permitting process. The really important thing that was learned during this whole procedure, so making a strategic environmental assessment and also a project environmental impact assessment, is that you really have to train also the public workers. So the people who are giving out the permits in the end, you have to train them, because they are going to ask questions about what is this, why is it this scenario assessed for image, what does it mean, how do I have to interpret that, how am I going to bring that into a permit application. So these are really important. So going a little bit from the regulatory side to more of the environmental impacts you could expect from the CCS project. And the environmental impacts are going to highlight, we're going to highlight the first step of the chain. It doesn't mean that those are going to be showstoppers, but I just want to highlight what kind of important things should be done some work about in your environmental impact assessment if you go to the CCS project. So for instance, for power plants, typically you can see around the world, I've reviewed environmental impact assessment procedures for power plants, also for power plants with CCS. And you can see that a typical phase that is of importance for a CCS project is the operational phase. The most environmental impacts are in using the power plant, not in building the power plant or in demolishing the power plant. And that can be different compared to, for instance, transport and CO2 storage. So the focus is on the operational phase. In the Netherlands, there's really a focus on emissions to air. Emissions to air are important, they should be balanced and minimized to the extent possible. And the environmental impact assessment should address how to optimize energy efficiency, use of waste heat, use of end-of-pipe emission control technologies like desulfurization or DeNOx, so reducing nitrogen oxide emissions, and how did they deal with cooling water use and cooling water discharge. Those are the important aspects. So if you now look at the CO2, a power plant with CO2 capture, how should we then address these items, but then for a CCS project? Well, if you look at energy, for instance, we know that the CO2 capture will cost energy, so your energy consumption per kilowatt hour of produced power goes up. So this is an important aspect to be covered in procedure. Emissions to air also are certainly affected by CO2 capture. Predominantly by post-combustion capture, you will reduce some emissions to the air, I will show in the later slide, but you also increase some other emissions per kilowatt hour to the air. So you have to balance if what kind of level you want in terms of emissions to the air and you find acceptable from a permitting perspective. In terms of soil and water, also the capture plant uses water, so the water consumption is affected. Waste and byproduct formation is important. Certainly at the post-combustion capture you will have waste formation due to the capture plant. And an important part of the environmental impact assessment should also address how do you deal with this waste. Resource consumption, next to primary energy you consume during capture of CO2, we also consume other resources like the solvent itself and other products you need to prepare the capture process. The thing not often addressed is also external safety, so storage of chemicals and, for instance, high purity oxygen if you go to oxygen fuel firing. You should address that also in the environmental impact assessment. Here I've given a small example of a review we did some years ago. This is about the emissions of CO2, so the blue bars, NOx, SO2 and ammonia and particulate matter. And we've reviewed a lot of literature studies for this to get a little bit of insight on what happens with the emissions to air if you start with CO2 capture. I'm not going to address everything, but the main thing you should remember from the slide is that obviously if you go from power plants here, which have no capture, so ITCC, gasification, natural gas cycle, and pulverized coal, you reduce CO2, so all the blue bars go down. But for the other colors, you can sometimes see also, mainly for NOx, so NOx emissions, you can see that there's some kind of mixed message, that sometimes emissions go up, depending on how you equip your flue gas cleaning technologies, and sometimes emissions go down per kilowatt hour. And this can be important, for instance, when you want to balance CO2 reduction against local air quality. So this is important to consider also in your environmental impact assessment. Another point of attention is water. Maybe not so important in the Netherlands because we're in the Delta and we have a lot of cooling water available, a lot of water available. I don't know the exact situation in Taiwan, but the trend you can see for plants, so power plants equipped with CCS, is that the water use here in cubic meter per megawatt hour when using a cooling tower, it goes up. And here you can see for a combined cycle for a gas turbine, it almost doubles. You can also see the increase for a coal-fired power plant and also for a gasification power plant. It's a little bit lower. So the trend is that the cooling water use and also water use goes up when equipping the power plant with CCS. So summarizing this in one slide is that primary energy per kilowatt hour goes up, CO2 goes down. Other emissions to air might be going up and down. It depends on what kind of, how do you arrange your flue gas cleaning and how do you arrange the technology. It differs, for instance, between oxy-fuel firing and the gasification process. Emissions to soil and water, that's really also, it's difficult. It also goes up and down, but most of it is that you have more emissions also going into your water streams, but obviously depending on how you equip your technology to clean that. Waste and byproduct often goes up, resource consumption goes up, external safety is also then, because of storing more chemicals on site, external safety is a bit affected. One thing to mention for emissions to air, is not in my previous slide, is that for post-combustion capture, the solvent emissions and solvent degradation products are also a point of attention that is being addressed in the Dutch environmental impact assessment. For instance, we had to adapt, the Dutch had to adapt the legislation for emission of the solvent used there and have to adapt a level that was acceptable for them. So that's where also new legislation comes into play. Summarizing it for the environmental impact assessment, we can say that the method and the tools that are used to measure the environmental impacts, but also to assess on forehand the environmental impacts seem to be available. However, the exact emission profile, so whether the emissions go up and down and to what extent, that's not yet unknown. So really monitoring is of essence, certainly with the demonstration and pilot plans. Cross-media effects need further clarification, so it's important to consider how would you balance, for instance, an increase in a certain emission to air with a reduction of CO2 to the air. Would that be a net benefit, or do you think that it's an adverse effect? And although not typically used in an environmental impact assessment, the life cycle perspective can provide some insights. So within the Dutch program, we've looked at the life cycle perspective for, in this case, it's a gas-fired power plant. And we looked at these stages of the whole life cycle. So going from fuel extraction, in this case natural gas, to the storage of the CO2. And what we did, we looked at 18 environmental impact categories. And from the literature, we know that, for instance, for a certain environmental impact, there are certain environmental damage costs. So we applied also damage costs to this environmental impact. And what we did then is we calculate over the whole life cycle whether it would be a net benefit or not to equip the power plant with CCS. In this case, you can see that equipping the gas-fired power plant first had a damage cost of around 80 euros. It's about 750 Taiwanese dollar. And reduced it to about 13 euros. So overall, when looking at the whole life cycle, with this perspective, the environmental performance improved. Transport by pipeline, a whole different ballgame, whole different assessment area. Typically, the important parts of the environmental impacts from the transport pipeline is the construction and operational phase. Those are the phases where you have the most anticipated impacts. At least that's the focus of the environmental impact assessment I've reviewed. Important environmental effects to take into account are disturbance of the soil and groundwater flows you have in a certain ecosystem. Contamination of the soil during construction, but also maybe if you heat the pipes, there can be also heating of the ground that may be adverse. Noise nuisance due to compressing the CO2 can be a small local effect, and risks due to pipeline failure. And we'll go to a little bit into depth into the next slide on that, because this was an important thing in the Netherlands, that one of the fears of the Dutch people living near Barendrecht, so that was the failed CO2 storage case, they actually were afraid also of the risk of the CO2 pipeline. They were afraid of the risks coming from CO2 storage, but also of the risk from CO2 pipeline. And what's important to know of the risk of CO2 pipeline is that there's a lot of research going on, predominantly in Europe, as far as I know, on getting the risk assessment models right. So understanding how exactly, if a pipeline fails, what happens exactly with the CO2? How does it disperse from the pipeline, and whether it can affect concentrations of CO2 that are dangerous to humans. So this is an important aspect that's being studied in Europe. Another important aspect is the impurities and safety. For instance, if you have H2S or other impurities in your pipeline, it can affect the risk. So the risk of the pipeline failing, but also these gases can be harmful for human beings. What's found in literature is that the models that are used to calculate these risks are not uniformly over the whole world. So it's important that you, when you analyze the risk of CO2 pipeline, that you use an understandable and maybe conservative limit of adverse effect of CO2 exposure. So this is important when selecting, the dose effect relationship for CO2 risk assessment. An important aspect from legislation point of view is that you have to have the legislation in place to accept CO2 pipelines and also to look at the safety of the CO2 pipelines. Storage. So the last part of the presentation is about also the last part of where the CO2 ends, hopefully. And what I did for storage is that I looked at the environmental impact assessment procedure done for the road project, so for the offshore storage of CO2, but also looked at analog environmental impact assessment for natural gas storage or waste storage. And what is important to understand, and I think it's also to make clear to the public when doing the environmental impact assessment, is that they have for storage you have a distinction between the infrastructure that you have in the underground or above ground. So maybe that can be your installation from where you inject the CO2, and the underground system. Why is this important? Because often the engineered system, so all the pipes, the installations, those are known, those are engineered. The failures, the possible failure scenarios that lead to possible risks, those are known to the industry. And can be estimated using existing models to calculate, for instance, risks. But for the underground system and the non-engineered system, so for the part where we maybe have a little bit less knowledge about, so the whole deep underground and uncharacterized reservoirs, we have to approach in a different way. And that's also what you see in the risk assessment done for those CO2 storage sites, is that at least for the Netherlands, that they split up between an engineered system, so the pipelines, the installations, and a non-engineered system, so the CO2 storage reservoir. A specific point of attention where they looked at, it's a couple of hundreds of pages of such a document, but the focus and the outcomes were important to assess were the leakage of CO2, displacement of brine, so that's the reservoir fluid, that's the underground, and seismicity and uplift. And especially the latter is of concern in the Netherlands because we have natural gas production, and we have important seismic effects and not uplift but subsidence, the other way around. And that's also having a lot of public debate currently. So that's important to assess. New phases compared to typically underground storage and underground projects, where that you have a pre-construction baseline monitoring, so what happens before you do the project, so that you have a baseline to compare against when you are running the project or proposing the project. And you have a long-term phase, which is also dealt with liability and long-term monitoring. So the really important aspects lead to, there are some uncertainties about the underground system, the non-engineered system. So monitoring and remediation is a really important aspect of the environmental impact procedure. So what can go wrong, but only know how can you correct if something goes wrong. And I also want to give you a brief insight into the risk assessment of CO2 storage that happened in the Netherlands. So the risk assessment started with step one, which is the evaluation of possible storage reservoirs. Here it says that you have to have multiple locations, so which location is best. Actually, in this case, the offshore storage location was the only one left relevant for this project, so there was not really a step in this assessment. So it's important to consider whether you want to embed such approach for Taiwan. Then the second step is that together with a group of experts, we try to identify what can go wrong with the storage site. So possible threats that can happen that will end up in what they call the event of CO2 migration. So they identified certain threats that can lead to the event of CO2 migration, and they try to estimate what kind of consequences would that mean for the ecosystem, but also for human beings in terms of risks. They also then assess for this storage location what kind of barriers are there in place or can be put in place to reduce those threats leading to an event, or in the case of an event that there are some remediation actions or mitigation actions that reduce the consequence of this leakage. And those threats, those assessment of what can happen with a certain storage site They use that with, they call it features, events, and process databases, which are, a couple of them are being used worldwide. So with this semi-quantitative assessment of scenarios that can go wrong, they started a whole puzzle, set of studies, including reservoir geology, a reservoir study to model flows in the reservoir. Also did some geochemical modeling, looked at what's the integrity of the topsoil, so of the cap rock, and possible faults in this reservoir. They looked at the wells. Are they strong enough to, or are they good enough to prevent migration of CO2? And they did a migration path study for this site. So with this knowledge, so with the possible threats, and also with the detailed characterization of the storage site, they found that the most important scenarios, what could go wrong, and what should be assessed in more detail, are migration through the cap rock, so that's the overlying rock that seals the reservoir and holds the CO2. Migration via a spill point, so that it leaks outside, so that's only outside of the reservoir. Migration via a vault in the underground, or migration via a well. So those four scenarios were assessed in more detail. And what they did then is they identified, okay, what kind of mitigation measures or actually types of monitoring should be applied that we can measure whether these scenarios are occurring, yes or no. So it's really important is that which kind of monitoring is in place to measure whether we should do something. And in this project, there's a whole set of monitoring technologies being proposed. Most important ones are the seismic baseline study. So they run seismics to see what happens with the CO2 plume. They constantly measure the temperature and composition of what goes into the ground to measure if there's a change in that. They always make sure that the reservoir pressure is lower than the initial reservoir pressure. So in this case it was about 340 bars when the reservoir still holds a natural gas. So the limit of this particular reservoir is that the pressure of CO2 in this reservoir should always be below that 340 bar. Another calculation is a mass balance to see whether they expect is the amount of CO2 you see in the reservoir is that the same amount as you have injected it. And they use this traffic light method, so they developed ranges for all of these monitoring tools, measurements. They develop ranges on beforehand, and they say, okay, if the range is between this range and it's green, then we go ahead with the injections. If it's yellow, then we do more research and look where does it come from, why do we find this anomaly. And if it's red, we immediately stop injecting and look what can we do to remediate this risk scenario. So next to knowing, understanding what kind of scenarios can happen, it's also good to define what kind of risks we actually accept as society or as society to develop CCS. And that's why they developed the risk matrix in this project. And they always looked at the consequence. So what happens, what actually is the impact of a risk scenario occurring, and look at the probability. And they try to plot certain scenarios or occurrences, they try to plot that into this risk matrix. And if you remember the four scenarios that were of importance in this road project, they thought it was migration through cap rock, migration via a spill point, and via fault. The experts in this project all assess this as a really low chance of occurring, so the probability is really low. And whether it would occur, then the impact would also be very low. So, and you can see here the blue area is what would be accepted in this particular project. They found a challenge for the existing wells in this project. So there were already existing gas production wells in this reservoir, and they found that the probability CO2 migration via these wells could happen. So they could not exclude this occurrence. And whether it would occur, there could be a possibility that CO2 leaks upward and comes into layers above the reservoir. So they did additional studies and they suggested new, for instance, a workover of the well of other remediation options to reduce this risk from medium and the low combination to also a negligible risk. And this is also they communicated this to the stakeholders, which as far as I know was well accepted. So having defined the risk acceptance criteria, it's then important to have this risk management plan, where you look into the design, operational phase, and closure, and also long-term management of and monitoring of the storage side. And I addressed already some monitoring technologies, but basically you monitor the injection process, the wells, the integrity of the reservoir, plume tracking, and CO2 migration out of the reservoirs. Those are the most important goals of doing monitoring in CO2 storage. And the techniques being used in this offshore activity were seismics, well logging, sampling, the pressure in the enemy, and various other tools are being suggested. But you have to keep aware that as this is not yet an ongoing project, it's also foreseen that these monitoring results and risk scenarios may change when the knowledge of a certain reservoir also increases. So feedback from monitoring results back into the risk scenarios, and then also refining the monitoring plan should be a continuous improvement cycle for risk assessment. And then finally, how to communicate those risks with stakeholders and also to the general public is an important part of what you do in an environmental impact assessment. I'll skip that. So basically, if you look at all the parts of the CCS life cycle, what are important aspects to take away for the procedure? Well, look at an integrated assessment of your benefits and trade-offs of CO2 capture. Don't look only at the CO2 benefit, also look at other environmental impacts. For transport, the important part was how to assess the risks in a quantitative manner and communicate this with the public. It's truly important. For storage, is that public perception of offshore storage is a little bit, I would say, easier than onshore storage. The proof was in the Netherlands, the Barendrecht case got a lot of appeals and trouble by the public opposition, and the offshore storage project has limited public opposition. On storage, it's important to assess strategic alternatives to storage in an early phase. So look at what kind of storage alternatives do you have, and also in an early assessment, let the public have a say in this, whether they maybe have a preference for a certain storage site. It's better to have this earlier in the development of CCS than later on, when you only have one site left and which has a no-go due to public opposition. So public engagement early in the phase in the project is important. In terms of recommendations on the procedure, so more of the legal procedure, it's important to have the criteria in place for when do you do an environmental impact assessment, when do you have to do a strategic environmental assessment for plans. And also related to that, my personal opinion is that it would be really good to have strategic environmental assessment in the early phase of CCS development. I think this was what held back also CCS in the Netherlands a little bit, because there were no strategic communications from the government or from stakeholders on this CCS. The first thing they heard was that there's a project and it's going to be under their houses. So that's not how you want to do that in the next couple of decades. In terms of legal procedures, it's good to have a streamlining permitting process. So if there are multiple levels, national government, local government involved, try to combine them as much as possible, educate them into a one-stop permitting shop to make it better for all the parties actually, and fasten the procedure. Public participation, I've dealt with that, and flexibility of project stakeholders is also key. It's important to, CCS is not at the place yet where everything is known, the permitting is not yet in place, so you have to be flexible in terms of, for instance, the monitoring plans and the site performance criteria you have in the permit. So it should be a flexibility of project stakeholders from the governmental side, project side, to develop CCS in a fast track. And actually, key message to take home, you can read it. And I'm open for questions. Still. Thank you.